At 1:17 a.m., the system marked an aircraft as established on final for runway 22 and assigned it a landing sequence slot, even though nothing had entered controlled airspace. That assignment happens only after a handoff, a verified transponder, and a controller acceptance. None of those steps had occurred. The data block had no call sign, no beacon code, and no flight plan attached, but the approach path was already drawn and locked in. The runway timeline shifted to make space for it. I checked the inbound list and the handoff queue. Both were empty. I switched to raw radar. A return appeared 12 miles out, already aligned with the localizer, descending through 4,200 feet at a steady rate that matched a normal approach profile. The system updated again at 1:18 a.m., reducing the distance and altitude as if it had already been cleared to continue. The assignment remained active. The sequence had started without any step that should have allowed it. The rule on our night desk was simple. If an aircraft was inside the outer ring and descending toward the airport, somebody had to be talking to it. There were no exceptions unless it was military, emergency, or a false target being filtered out by the system. This one did not fit any of those. It was not squawking emergency. It was not using a military code. It was not drifting like weather or ground clutter. The track line was clean, and the predicted path drew itself straight down the published arrival path for runway 22. I opened the flight plan window and searched by beacon code, but the field was blank. I searched by position, then by altitude, then by any active flight within 30 miles of the field. Nothing matched. The tower frequency was quiet. The center line had no pending coordination. I leaned closer to the scope and switched the target from fused display to radar only. The symbol flickered once, then came back in the same place. At 1:19 a.m., it crossed 11 miles final. Altitude 3,500, as if it had been cleared to continue. I called center first because that was the normal path. If a target appeared on my side without a handoff, the upstream controller was usually the one who had forgotten to push it or had a stuck data block on their end. The controller on the line checked his scope while I watched the aircraft keep moving. He had no active track in that position. He had no flight plan terminating at our airport within that window. He had one cargo flight 50 miles west, one medical helicopter south of the river, and nothing northeast descending to runway 22. I asked him to look raw, not just tagged traffic. He came back with the same answer, nothing. While he was still on the line, my target updated again, 10 miles final, altitude 3,100, speed 142. The data block shifted slightly to avoid overlapping the approach fix the way the automation does when it expects traffic to continue along a known path. Center could not see it. My scope could. That was the first clean split between the system and reality. I had signed off on a bad track once at my last job, and it stayed on my record even after they corrected it. I stopped clearing anything I could not verify after that. I brought up the tower camera feed next. It was mounted high on the cab and pointed down the final approach corridor. Mostly black sky and runway lights at that hour. If anything was 10 miles out on final, I would not expect to see much yet. But I checked because the radar was acting like the aircraft was real. The tower controller answered before I asked. He had no arrival, no lights reported, no engine noise, no traffic on tower frequency. He checked the binocular stand anyway. I watched the camera while he looked through the glass. The runway lights were steady. The approach lights were steady. No landing clearance had been issued. No aircraft had called the field. On my scope, the The target passed the final approach, fix at 1:21 a.m., altitude 2,700, exactly where an aircraft should be if it was established. The system generated a normal descent trend arrow beside the tag. That bothered me more than the target itself. False returns do not usually follow procedure. This one was flying the book. I checked the maintenance status next because radar ghosts are not new. Weather can paint strange returns. Transponders can duplicate. A DSB can inject bad position data if the feed is dirty. That is why we had a checklist taped to the side of the console. Verify source, compare sensor feeds, check neighboring sector, confirm tower visual, then notify the operations manager if the return stays consistent. I followed it in order. Primary radar showed a weak return under the tag. Secondary radar showed no beacon response. A DSB showed no aircraft. Multilateration showed nothing. The fused track should have dropped with that combination, or at least flagged as coasted. Instead, the automation strengthened the track and gave it a projected runway crossing time. 1:27 a.m. I wrote that time down on the paper log. Then I looked back up. The target was 8 miles out, altitude 2,300. The system had no identity for it, but it had already decided where it would land. The supervisor on duty, Mark, came over when I called him, still holding the paper cup he had been using since midnight. I pointed to the target without touching the screen. He stood behind my chair and watched 2 updates go by. 7.6 miles final, 7.2, altitude 2,100, then 1,980. He asked if center had it. I said no. He asked if tower had it. I said no. He reached over and pulled up the arrival manager on the side display. The sequence list was empty until 2:04 a.m. No scheduled cargo, no medevac, no reposition flight, no late commuter. The airport was quiet. The system still placed the unknown target into the runway timeline. It created spacing around an aircraft that officially did not exist. Mark told me to keep it on the scope and not issue any blind transmissions yet. Then, the runway occupancy predictor changed from clear to pending arrival. It used no call sign, just pending arrival. At 1:23 a.m., the target crossed 6 miles final, and the tower cab called us back. The tower controller said the approach lights had just stepped up from low to medium without anyone touching the panel. That was tied to the landing system, not my radar scope. A pilot can request the lights on the frequency, or tower can change them manually, but neither had happened. The lighting log showed an automatic input from the approach monitoring system. I opened that log on my second screen. The entry was already there. Runway 22. Approach activation, aircraft on final, range 6.1 nautical miles. No call sign, no beacon code, no controller initials. The timestamp was 1:22 a.m., 1 minute before tower reported the change. I printed the line because printed logs are harder to explain away later. The paper came out warm from the little printer beside the rack. While I was tearing it off, the radar target passed 5.7 miles final. I tried the standard blind call at 1:24 a.m. because the checklist changed once the runway systems began responding. I transmitted on approach frequency and asked the unknown aircraft on final for runway 22 to identify. I kept my voice flat and used the range and position because that was what we were trained to do. There was no answer. I tried again on guard frequency. No answer. The scope showed no ident flash, no code change, no radio failure indicator. The target kept descending through 1,700 feet. Mark called tower and had them hold all ground movement even though there was nobody moving except a maintenance truck parked by the snow equipment shed. The runway status board changed to arrival protected. That should have required a tagged aircraft. Instead, the system protected the runway for a blank target. The maintenance truck icon disappeared from the airport surface display. The truck itself was still visible on the camera, sitting in the same place. At 4 miles final, the target stopped behaving like a ghost and started behaving like a flight we were late managing. The minimum safe altitude alert stayed silent because the descent was correct. The conflict probe stayed silent because no other aircraft were nearby. The runway monitor stayed green because the runway was empty. Every safety system accepted the motion as normal, while every identification system rejected it. I opened the replay buffer and dragged the track backward to see where it had first appeared. The first stored point was not at the edge of the sector. It was already inside, 15.2 miles from the runway, altitude 5,000, established on a heading that matched the arrival path. There was no earlier point, no coast track, no sensor merge, no handoff. The first recorded position was already controlled, as if the aircraft had been created after the part where it should have entered the airspace. I saved the replay clip. The file name auto filled with the runway and time. At 1:26 a.m., the target reached 2 miles final, altitude 900, speed 134, and the tower still had no visual contact. The approach lights were brighter now. The runway edge lights reflected on wet pavement from earlier rain, and the camera showed a clean black approach path beyond the fence. No landing lights, no silhouette, no sound on the tower ambient mic except wind across the cab. Then the runway status line changed again. Arrival imminent. I had never seen it display that for an unidentified target. Mark told tower to keep the runway lights up and say nothing unless they saw traffic. I watched the scope update to 1.5 miles, then 1.2. At 1:27 a.m., the target crossed the threshold on radar. The altitude read 100, then 0. The runway monitor marked landing complete. The camera showed an empty runway. The surface system added a new aircraft icon at the far end, rolling out on runway 22. At 1:28 a.m., the surface display showed the aircraft rolling past the midpoint of runway 22, even though the camera still showed nothing on the pavement. The surface system used a different set of sensors, ground radar, and transponder feeds tied to airport movement, so it should not have agreed with the airborne radar if the target was false. It matched it exactly. The icon moved at a steady taxi speed, tracking the center line, then drifting slightly right toward the high-speed exit like a normal rollout. I zoomed the surface map in and checked the label. There was still no call sign, no tail number, no type. The field just said, unknown traffic. The timestamp updated every second. I switched the surface camera to the exit taxiway. The lights were on, the asphalt was empty, and the hold short line was clear. On the surface map, the icon crossed that line without stopping. Tower confirmed they had not issued any taxi instruction. The system recorded that it had. The rule on the ground side was tighter than in the air. Nothing moved on the runway or taxiways without a controller assigning it a route. The ground control panel showed no active strip for an arrival, no runway exit instruction, no taxi clearance, no pushback request. The system still generated a taxi path from runway 22 to the cargo apron on the east side. It drew the line in blue and placed the unknown aircraft onto it as if it had been sequenced there earlier. I opened the clearance log. A new entry appeared at the top. Taxi via Alpha to Cargo Stand 3. Time 1:27 a.m. Controller field blank. The system had created a clearance without a controller. I clicked into the entry to see if it was editable. It was locked. The status read, executed. On the camera, Alpha was empty. On the map, the icon moved along Alpha at 10 knots, turning exactly where the painted lines would guide a real aircraft. I tried to force a mismatch by switching the surface system to manual confirmation mode. That required each movement to be acknowledged by ground before it advanced on the display. It was not something we used often, but it was there for training and failure scenarios. I toggled it on and waited for the next update. The icon did not pause. It continued down Alpha, then slowed near the intersection with Bravo, then resumed at the same steady speed. The manual mode indicator stayed lit, but the system ignored it. I checked the settings twice, then had Mark confirm it over my shoulder. He saw the same thing. The log recorded each segment as confirmed, with no user ID attached. I moved the camera to the Alpha Bravo intersection and watched the empty pavement while the icon executed a turn that would have required steering input. The turn radius was clean, no overshoot. The map tracked it perfectly. The ground outside did not change. At 1:31 a.m., the icon reached the cargo apron boundary and slowed again. The apron lights were on a timer, and at that hour, they were set to low. The system increased them to medium without a request, the same way the approach lights had changed earlier. I opened the lighting control panel and saw a new line in the log. Apron east lighting increased. Aircraft inbound. Stand 3. The time stamp on that entry read 1:30 a.m., 1 minute before the icon reached the boundary. I printed that line as well. The paper stacked beside the first printout, both with times that did not match the visible sequence on the cameras. The icon crossed onto the apron and aligned itself with Stand 3. That stand was empty, a painted box with a single power unit and a set of cones. On the camera, the cones were still in place. On the map, the icon stopped inside the box, and the status changed from taxi to parked. The system then did something I had only seen during scheduled turns. It generated a ground handling sequence. A list appeared on the operations screen. GPU connect, chocks in, door open, unload, begin. Each line had a time next to it, spaced out over the next 20 minutes. There was still no aircraft on the camera. The cones had not moved. No tug had driven out. No ground crew had left the office. The radio stayed quiet. I checked the staff schedule to see if anyone had been assigned to that stand. Nobody was on shift for cargo handling until 2:30 a.m. The system did not care. It marked GPU connected at 1:33 a.m. The power unit icon on the map changed state from idle to in use. On the camera, the unit was still sitting with its cable coiled on the ground. I walked out to the window behind the console and looked across the field myself. The glass reflected the room behind me, but I angled to cut the reflection and focused on the cargo apron. It was dark with a few pools of light. Stand 3 was visible between two light poles. The cones were still there, 3 in a line. No fuselage, no tail, no navigation lights, no beacon. I went back to the scope and checked the airborne radar again, in case the track had reappeared or split. The sky was empty in that sector. The surface map still showed the aircraft parked. The operations screen advanced to chocks in at 1:34 a.m. I watched the cones on the camera. They did not move. The system marked them as placed. I wrote down the times in sequence, then checked the wall clock. It read 1:34 a.m., matching the system, but the actions it was recording were not happening in front of us. At 1:35 a.m., the runway camera picked up a change that did not match the rest of the feed. The pavement stayed empty, but the light pattern along the center line shifted in a way that only happens when something interrupts it. The reflection broke in segments, moving down the runway at a constant speed, the same speed the system had recorded for rollout. There was no shape, no outline, just sections of light dimming and returning in sequence, as if something solid was passing over them without being visible. I switched between cameras. The effect stayed aligned with the path the surface map had drawn earlier. The timing matched the rollout profile exactly. I rewound the feed and watched it again. The breaks in the light moved the same way. Same spacing, same speed. When I paused the frame, the runway was fully lit again. The system marked the aircraft as parked at the stand at that exact moment. Mark told me to notify the operations manager, so I called the number on the laminated card and gave him a short report, unknown arrival, with full system progression and no visual confirmation. He asked if we had a tag or a call sign. I said no. He asked if any system disagreed. I said no, except the cameras and our eyes. He told us to keep logging and not to interfere with the system unless it affected safety. That last part was the problem. The system had already taken control of runway protection and ground routing. If it decided to push this aircraft back out, it would conflict with real traffic later in the hour. While I was still on the call, the operations screen advanced to door open at 1:35 a.m. A new field appeared, passenger count unknown. That did not belong to cargo handling. It belonged to passenger flights. The system had switched categories without any input. I checked the flight database again, this time searching for any flight that had been diverted or had filed late. There was nothing matching our airport within the last hour. I widened the search to 100 miles. There were 2 aircraft inbound to other fields, both on file, both talking to their controllers. Neither matched the timing or the path we had just watched. I went back to the replay buffer and ran the landing sequence again at half speed. The track crossed the threshold, decelerated, exited, taxied, and parked, all with timing that matched a real aircraft profile. There were no jumps, no missing points, no signs of interpolation. It looked like a clean recording of a normal arrival. The cameras for each segment showed nothing during those same seconds. I stopped the replay at the moment of threshold crossing and noted the timestamp, 1:27 a.m. Then I checked the approach lighting log again. It still showed activation at 1:22 a.m., 5 minutes before the crossing. At 1:37 a.m., the operations screen added another line, "Unload begin." The system started a countdown timer for cargo handling, even though it had already labeled the flight as having a passenger field. The inconsistency did not stop it. It kept building a process around the parked icon. I opened the maintenance camera for Stand 3, a closer view mounted on a pole near the power unit. The image showed the same 3 cones, the cable still coiled, the ground dry, no shadows moving, no personnel. The map showed the aircraft occupying the stand. The stand occupancy flag turned red, indicating it was in use. That flag would block any real aircraft from being assigned to that position later. I tried to clear the occupancy manually. The system rejected the input and returned the flag to red with the same blank user ID. At 1:41 a.m., I stopped watching the stand camera and focused on the timing across all systems. The pattern was consistent. Every system event showed up about 1 minute before the point where the radar or surface display would mark the same phase as complete. The approach lights had logged early. The taxi clearance had logged early. The apron lighting had logged early. The operations steps were all leading the movement by the same margin. I pulled up the system clock diagnostics to rule out a drift. All controllers in the room were synced to the same time server, and the wall clock matched it. There was no offset between subsystems. The only offset was inside the sequence itself. The system was writing the next step before the previous step had physically happened, then updating the motion to meet what it had already written. I noted each timestamp in order and drew a line on the paper. The line stayed straight. I tried to break the pattern by forcing a step out of order. The next scheduled action on the operations screen was fuel connect at 1:43 a.m. That required a ground unit to be assigned and a valve status to change. I opened the fuel control panel and set the stand to unavailable, which should have blocked any connection from being recorded. The panel accepted my input and marked stand 3 as locked. I watched the seconds roll over to 1.43. The operations screen still logged fuel connect with the same blank user field. The fuel panel flipped back to available without showing a user action. The valve status changed to open. The camera showed the same empty stand with the cones in place and no hose attached to anything. I toggled the lock again. The panel took it, then released it on its own after the next update. The sequence did not pause. It adjusted the controls to match itself. At 1:45 a.m., I opened the audit trail for user actions, looking for any automated account or background service that could be writing these entries. The trail listed each change with a user ID, a terminal number, and a process name. The entries for the unknown aircraft had process names that matched normal modules: lighting control, ground routing, operations manager. But the user field was empty, and the terminal field showed the local console I was using. I had not touched those panels at the times recorded. Mark had been standing behind me when the earlier entries were created. The audit trail placed the actions on my station anyway. I compared the exact seconds. Some entries were logged while my hands were off the controls. The replay camera behind us showed both of us in frame with no movement at those moments. The audit trail did not change. It kept assigning the actions to my console. I moved to a different workstation to see if the assignment would follow me. The second console had its own login and its own audit channel. I signed in and brought up the same screens. The unknown aircraft was still parked at Stand 3, services in progress. The next operation, Catering Connect, was scheduled for 1:47 a.m. I did not touch anything. At 1:47, the entry appeared on both consoles at the same time. The first console showed the action as coming from its terminal. The second console showed the action as coming from the first console as well. I checked the network monitor. There was no external input, no remote session, no background job flagged as a source. The system wrote the action into its own log and then assigned it to a real terminal. The assignment was consistent with where I had started, not where I was now. The pattern held for movement as well. Even though the aircraft was parked, the system still predicted small position adjustments as part of ground handling, slight shifts to align with equipment. At 1:48 a.m., the surface map showed a minor reposition within the stand. a few feet forward. The camera did not change. The cones did not move. The ground unit icon updated again, now marked as under load. I opened the equipment inventory to see if any unit had been removed from its storage position. All units were listed as present. The status for the GPU at stand 3 was in use, but its inventory record still showed it as idle in the yard. 2 records for the same unit existed at the same time, one in use at the stand, one idle in storage. I refreshed the inventory. Both entries remained. The system accepted both states without conflict. At 1:50 a.m., I looked back at the departure line the system had scheduled for 1:58. It had already generated a route, taxi from stand 3 via Alpha to runway 22. Departure path to the northeast, initial climb 3000, then as filed. There was still no flight plan attached, but the departure path matched a common outbound route. I checked the departure list for that hour. There were no scheduled departures until after 2:10 a.m. The system inserted the unknown aircraft into a gap that did not exist. It also generated a slot in the runway sequence and pushed the first real departure 10 minutes later. The sequence display adjusted itself as if a real aircraft had been added. I printed the updated sequence. The unknown flight had no call sign, but it occupied a position with times and spacing that affected the rest of the schedule. I tried a different approach. I created a manual entry for a test vehicle on the surface system and placed it on Alpha, a simple icon with a known ID. Then I issued a hold position command to it and confirmed the hold on the log. The system accepted my commands and displayed the vehicle stopped. I then watched what would happen when the unknown aircraft began its taxi out. If the system was following its own sequence, it would have to either respect the hold or override it. At 1:52 a.m., the operations screen advanced to pushback complete, even though no pushback had occurred. The surface icon for the unknown aircraft moved out of stand 3 and onto Alpha. It approached the test vehicle icon. The system did not slow it. It did not stop it. It did not flag a conflict. The unknown aircraft passed through the test vehicle icon without any change. The test vehicle remained stopped. The conflict probe stayed silent. At 1:53 a.m., I checked the safety alerts again. The runway incursion system, the ground conflict alert, and the surface movement radar all showed normal status. The unknown aircraft was now halfway down Alpha, moving toward the runway. The test vehicle was still shown at its hold point. The two had occupied the same coordinates for a second on the map. No alert was generated. I replayed that moment. The overlap was visible in the replay as well. The system did not consider the unknown aircraft as an object for conflict purposes, even though it treated it as an object for routing and scheduling. It existed for some functions and did not exist for others. The split was not random. It followed the process steps. Routing and operations included it. Safety checks ignored it. At 1:55 a.m., the departure sequence on the operations screen moved the unknown aircraft to ready. A clearance line appeared, cleared for takeoff runway 22, wind calm, time 1:55 a.m., controller field blank. The tower had not issued that clearance. The runway status board changed to departure protected. Mark called tower again and had them confirm they had not cleared anyone. They confirmed. The camera on the runway threshold showed empty pavement. The surface map showed the unknown aircraft holding short, then crossing the hold line onto the runway. The runway incursion alert did not trigger. The hold, short lights did not change. The system recorded the crossing as authorized. The timestamps again led the motion by about a minute. The clearance had been written before the crossing happened. At 1:56 a.m., the unknown aircraft lined up on the runway center line on the surface map. The camera still showed nothing. The operations screen showed takeoff roll begin scheduled at 1:57 a.m. I looked back at my notes from the arrival. The same 1-minute lead was present at each phase. I wrote the expected times for rotation and airborne based on the speed profile the system had used on approach. Then I waited. At 1:57, the operations screen logged takeoff roll begin. The surface icon started moving down the runway. The speed increased in a smooth curve. The camera showed the same empty runway. At 1:58 a.m., the operations screen logged airborne. The airborne radar scope did not yet show a target. The system had written the departure before the radar could show it. At 1:59 a.m., the airborne radar finally updated with a target lifting off from runway 22, but it appeared a mile past the threshold instead of at the runway. The altitude read 700 feet on the first visible point, already climbing through a profile that skipped the initial rotation phase. The track line matched the departure path the system had written 2 minutes earlier. The data block still had no call sign and no beacon code. The ground speed jumped from 0 to 160 knots between updates, which is not how a real takeoff appears on primary returns. I checked the replay against my notes. The system had logged airborne at 1:58. The radar showed the first airborne position at 1:59. The gap was consistent with the pattern. The system wrote it first, then the radar filled in a version of it after. I tried to assign a temporary code to the target to force a tag. The system rejected the assignment and kept the field blank. The departure procedure required initial contact on departure frequency within a mile or two after liftoff. I transmitted again, asking the unknown aircraft departing runway 22 to identify and contact departure. There was no response. I switched to guard and repeated the call. No response. The target continued climbing through 1,200 feet, then 1,800, following the exact headings and altitudes the system had already placed in the departure route. I checked the audio recorder to make sure my transmissions were going out. They were logged and played back clean. The absence of any reply did not change the track. The system added the next step, climb to 3,000, then joined the outbound route. The radar updated one cycle later to match that climb. The sequence was holding. The system defined the movement, then the radar reflected it. At 2:01 a.m., I opened the weather overlay to see if any conditions could be generating a stable false return. The radar showed clear skies in that sector. No precipitation, no temperature inversion noted in the last report that would support ducting or anomalous propagation. The wind read calm at the surface and light at altitude. There was nothing to support a phantom track that clean. I toggled between primary only and combined sensors again. The target weakened on primary only, but did not disappear. On combined, it strengthened and gained a smoother path line. I checked with the adjacent sector to the northeast where the aircraft was heading. They had nothing on their scope. I gave them the exact position and altitude. They still had nothing. My radar showed it passing through 3,200 feet, climbing. The next sector saw empty air. I tried to create a direct interaction with the system by placing a restriction on the departure route. I drew a temporary no-entry zone across the outbound path at 3,500 feet, which should have triggered a route adjustment, or at least a warning if the aircraft entered it. The system accepted the restriction and displayed it clearly. If this sequence ended up in the report under my console, it would be treated as my traffic, whether I had touched it or not. The unknown aircraft continued climbing and crossed into that zone without any change. No alert appeared. The system did not reroute it. The route line remained as originally generated. The restriction existed on the screen and in the rules, but it did not apply to this target. I checked the restriction log. It showed my entry at 2:02 a.m. with my user ID. The conflict log remained empty. The target passed through 3,500 and kept climbing to 4,000, following the planned path. At 2:03 a.m., the operations screen added a new line tied to the departure, en route services active. That was not a standard line for our system, which did not manage aircraft beyond the immediate airport environment. It pulled a status from a different module, one used for airline coordination. The field, again, had no call sign. The system was extending the process beyond its normal scope. I opened the network connections to see if it was pulling data from an external feed. There was no new connection established. The module was running locally, using internal data. The timestamp on the en route line read 2:02 a.m., 1 minute before it appeared. The same lead. The radar showed the aircraft at 4,800 feet, then 5,300, matching the climb profile written in the route. The next sector still reported no traffic. I went back to the audit trail and filtered for any process that could write ahead of time. The list included scheduled jobs, predictive modules, and test routines. None were active at that hour. The only process writing entries was the same set of operational modules we used during normal traffic. Each entry for the unknown aircraft had a creation time that preceded its visibility on the relevant display. I sorted the entries by creation time and then by display time. The difference held at roughly 60 seconds across all events. I selected one entry and attempted to delay it by adjusting the system clock on my console by a minute. The console allowed the adjustment locally, but the system corrected it immediately back to the network time. The entries did not shift. The lead remained constant. The sequence did not depend on my console time. At 2:05 a.m., the radar target reached 6,000 feet and leveled briefly before continuing its climb, following the exact altitude steps the system had outlined. The level off was recorded in the operations screen at 2:04 a.m. I checked the climb rate on the radar. It matched a typical regional jet profile again, smooth and consistent. I opened the flight plan editor and tried to attach a generic plan to the target, something minimal to force the system to treat it as known traffic. The editor would not attach to a blank identity. It required a call sign or code. I attempted to create a new flight plan with the current position and assign it forward. The system created the plan, but did not link it to the target. The plan existed separately in the list, with no aircraft attached. The target continued on its own path. The tower called again at 2:06 a.m. to report a change on their side. The runway lights, which had returned to normal after the departure, stepped down to low again, then back up to medium for a few seconds without any command. I opened the lighting log. It showed a new entry, approach lighting adjust, outbound aircraft, range 12 miles. The timestamp read 2:05 a.m. The outbound aircraft was now 12 miles from the field on the map. The system was still treating it as if it required local lighting changes even after it had left the airport environment. That did not fit any procedure. The lights stabilized after a few seconds. The radar showed the aircraft at 7,200 feet, continuing outbound. The next sector still reported nothing in that position. At 2:07 a.m., I tried one more direct interference. I set the target as a priority track and then attempted to drop it from the display using the manual drop function. The system requires confirmation for that action because it can remove real traffic from the screen. I confirmed the drop. The tag disappeared for one update cycle, then returned in the same position with the same blank fields. The audit trail recorded my drop action, then recorded a restore action with no user ID 1 second later. The restore timestamp read 2:06 a.m., 1 minute before the reappearance. The system had already decided to keep the target. My action was logged and then overwritten. The radar continued to update the position as if nothing had changed. At 2:08 a.m., the unknown aircraft reached 8,500 feet and turned slightly to join the outbound airway, exactly as the system had planned earlier. I checked the boundary line where it would leave my sector. The handoff should have been initiated to the next controller. The system generated a handoff entry at 2:07 a.m. with the receiving sector listed. I called that sector again and gave them the exact position and altitude. They still had no target. On my scope, the aircraft crossed the boundary and the data block dimmed as if it had been handed off. The next sector did not accept it because they could not see it. The system marked the handoff as complete anyway. The track continued on my display for another cycle, then faded, leaving no active target in the air. The operations screen added a final line at 2:09 a.m. Flight en route. Status normal. At 2:10 a.m., the airborne track was gone from my scope, but the system did not close the process. The operations screen still showed the flight as active, status normal, en route. The departure sequence remained in the history with times that led each phase. I opened the archive panel and tried to finalize the record, which should move it out of active status and into completed flights. The panel rejected the action and kept the flight open. A new line appeared under the same blank identity. Position update scheduled, 2:11 a.m. That did not belong to our system. We do not track position updates after handoff unless there is coordination. At 2:11, the entry logged itself. Position updated. Altitude 9,200. Route steady. There was no radar return to support it. The system was continuing the flight without any sensor input. I checked the next sector again. They still had no traffic in that corridor. I pulled the raw data feed from the radar server to see if anything was being filtered before it reached the display. The feed showed no returns in that position. The last real data point for the unknown aircraft ended at the sector boundary. Every position update after that existed only in the operations log. I compared the timestamps. The log entries still appeared 1 minute before their scheduled time. The system was writing the future of a flight it could not see. I tried to disable the operations module for that flight by isolating the record. The interface did not provide an isolate function for an unknown identity. It only allowed actions on recognized flights. The unknown record sat outside those controls, but still affected scheduling and logging. The next line appeared, cruise stable, 2 2:12 a.m. The timestamp on creation read 2:11 a.m. At 2:13 a.m., the system added a fuel consumption estimate and an arrival estimate for a different airport to the northeast. That information would normally come from a filed plan and airline data. There was still no plan attached. The destination field filled itself with a regional field 60 miles away. I opened that airport in a secondary window and checked their inbound list. They had no scheduled arrivals matching the time the system was projecting. I called their tower directly. They confirmed they had nothing inbound on that route. While I was on the call, the operations screen on my side logged descent begin at 2:14 a.m., 1 minute before the time it was supposed to happen. The system was now planning an arrival at a different airport with no input from that airport. The pattern had extended beyond our field. I watched the descent sequence write itself. Top of descent, speed reduction, initial approach, fix. Each line appeared with the same lead time. I asked the other airport to watch their cameras and approach lights. They agreed and kept the line open. At 2:15 a.m., they reported no changes. Their lights were steady, no activation. At 2:16, my system logged approach lighting increase for their runway 18, range 7 miles. They checked again. Nothing had changed on their side. Their logs showed no command. The entry existed only in my system. The disconnect was now between two separate facilities. I printed the new entries. The stack of paper on my desk grew, each page showing actions at another airport that had not occurred there. The system did not wait for confirmation. It wrote the sequence and moved forward. At 2:17 a.m., the descent profile reached 3,000 feet in the log. The other airport still reported empty skies. I asked them to switch to their raw radar view. They saw no target. I pulled up a regional traffic overlay that combined multiple feeds. It showed normal traffic in the area and no unknown track on that route. The only place the flight existed was in the operations sequence that had started at our field. The system added final approach at 2:18 a.m., 1 minute early. The pattern did not change with distance. It stayed locked to that 60-second lead. I checked the network again for any data being sent out. There was no outgoing connection to that airport. The sequence was not being shared. It was local, but it referenced external locations as if it had access. At 2:18 a.m., I tried to stop the sequence by shutting down the operations module entirely on my console. The interface went blank for a moment, then reloaded with the same data. The flight record was still there, now marked as in final approach at the other airport. The audit trail recorded my shutdown and a restart immediately after, with no user ID. The restart timestamp read 2:17 a.m., 1 minute before the action. The system restored itself to maintain the sequence. I checked the server room camera to see if any hardware had been accessed. The racks were closed. No one was inside. The environmental readings were normal. The system had restarted without any physical change. The other airport called back at 2:19 a.m. and said their runway lights had just stepped up from low to medium for a few seconds, then returned to low. They had not touched the panel. Their log did not show a command. The timing matched my log entry from a minute earlier. I asked them to watch the runway camera closely. They reported empty pavement. My system logged threshold crossing at 2:20 a.m. for their runway 18. They confirmed they still saw nothing. The pattern had carried over exactly, with the same one minute lead and the same absence of physical confirmation. I wrote down their times next to mine. The lines matched, offset by 60 seconds. The sequence was repeating at a different location without a track on any radar. At 2:21 a.m., the system logged landing complete at the other airport and began a ground sequence there. Taxi to a stand I could identify on their layout. I asked them to check that stand. It was empty. They watched the same cones, the same ground equipment, nothing moving. My operations screen showed chocks in at 2:22 a.m., 1 minute before the time it should occur. Their camera did not change. I checked the audit trail again. The entries for their airport were still being assigned to my console. The terminal field did not switch. The system treated all of this as if it was happening under my control, even though it was referencing another facility. The reach of the sequence did not depend on location. I tried one more control action. I created a manual block on the runway at the other airport in my system, marking it as closed. That should have conflicted with any landing sequence and forced a change. The block appeared on my display. The operations sequence ignored it. It logged taxi clearance and continued the ground movement. The other airport reported no change on their side. Their runway remained open. The block existed only in my system and had no effect on the sequence. The separation between the system and the physical world had become complete. The system was running a full flight cycle, independent of any sensor or controller input, and it was not accepting any constraint I applied. At 2:23 a.m., the second ground sequence finished, and the operations screen returned to a parked status at the other airport. Then a new line appeared at the top. Turnaround scheduled. Departure planned from that airport at 2:41 a.m. The pattern was starting again, now anchored to a different field. I looked at the printed logs covering my desk. The first line had been approach lights at our airport. Now the latest line was a departure plan at another airport, all tied to the same blank identity, all assigned to my console, all leading the events by 1 minute. I checked the clock again. 2:23 a.m. The next entry would appear at 2:24. The system had not paused since the first detection. It had moved from one place to another and kept the same sequence. It was not tied to a location. It was tied to the process itself. At 2:24 a.m., I stopped trying to block the sequence and focused on recording it cleanly. The system logged pushback, scheduled at the second airport with the same lead time. I opened a fresh page on the paper log and wrote each entry as it appeared, then wrote the matching time when the system would mark it as complete. The difference stayed at 60 seconds. I verified it against the wall clock and the system clock again. Both matched. The lead was internal to the sequence, not the clocks. The other airport stayed on the line and confirmed each physical check. Their cameras showed nothing moving. Their panels showed no commands. My system continued to write their process as if it were happening. I stopped issuing any transmissions. There was no response to them earlier, and the sequence did not depend on them. At 2:25 a.m., I checked the storage of logs to make sure nothing was being overwritten. The system was keeping full history for each entry, including creation time and display time. I exported the records to a local drive and then to a removable one. The files saved without error. The timestamps inside the files matched what I had on paper. I opened one of the files in a viewer that did not use our system interface. The entries were the same. The lead was present there as well. The data was not being altered by the display layer. It was written that way at creation. I compared the creation time of an entry to the system time at that moment. The entry existed before the moment it described. The file confirmed it. The sequence was not predicting in a separate field. It was committing the prediction as if it were a record. At 2:27 a.m., the second departure sequence began. The operations screen logged taxi begin at 2:26 a.m., then showed the aircraft moving on the surface map of the other airport. The camera at that airport showed empty pavement. The same pattern repeated. Pushback, taxi, hold short, clearance, each written a minute early. I asked the other airport to create a ground vehicle hold on the taxiway I saw on my map. They placed it on their side. Their system showed the vehicle stopped. My system showed the unknown aircraft passing through that position without any conflict. The separation held across both facilities. The unknown aircraft existed for routing and scheduling, and did not exist for conflict and visual confirmation. The sequence continued as if both states were true at the same time. At 2:29 a.m., I noticed the system had begun to pre-populate entries beyond the immediate next step. The queue showed 2 future lines, takeoff roll and airborne, both with creation times already set 1 minute ahead of their display. The buffer was extending. I checked earlier entries. They still followed the 1 minute lead. The new entries suggested the system was holding more than 1 step ahead. I wrote down the expected times for the next 3 events and watched them appear exactly as written. The radar at the other airport never showed a target. The departure still completed in the operations log. The pattern was stable. It did not drift. It did not degrade. It did not respond to any control input. At 2:31 a.m., the second departure left the other airport in the system and entered en route status again. The destination field filled with a third airport, farther along the same general direction. I did not call them yet. I watched the entries for a minute to confirm the pattern would carry again. The system logged climb, then cruise, each 1 minute early. I opened a map of the region and traced the path the system was using. It followed a common airway that connected the 3 airports. The altitudes matched typical step climbs for that route. The system was building a chain of flights along a real corridor, without any aircraft. It was using real procedures, real paths, and real timing, but there was nothing on any radar or camera to support it. At 2:33 a.m., I called the third airport and gave them a short explanation. Unknown sequence, no radar target, check your lights and cameras. They agreed to monitor. Within a minute, my system logged their approach lighting increase with the same lead time. They reported no change at that moment. A minute later, they reported a brief step in their lights, then a return to normal. The timing matched again. I wrote down both sets of times. The offset stayed constant. The sequence did not depend on my location anymore. It propagated through the network of procedures, not through the network connections. Each facility saw the physical effect a minute after my system wrote it, and only in certain systems, like lighting, they did not see an aircraft. At 2:35 a.m., I stopped checking individual panels and watched the overall behavior. The system was creating a complete cycles for each leg: arrival, ground, departure, en route, then handing it off to the next airport in the chain. It did not miss a step. It did not repeat an entry. It did not stall. The only constant difference was the absence of a physical aircraft and the one minute lead on every entry. I checked the audit trail one more time. All entries were still assigned to my original console. I had not been at that console for over an hour. The assignment did not move. It stayed fixed at the point where the first anomaly appeared. The system had tied the entire sequence to that origin. At 2:37 a.m., I tried a final simple test. I wrote a manual note in the system log at my console, a plain text entry with the current time, noting that no aircraft had been observed. The system accepted the note. It appeared in the log with my user ID and the correct time. 1 minute later, a duplicate of my note appeared above it with a timestamp 1 minute earlier than when I had written it. The text was identical. The system had created a version of my note before I wrote it. I compared the two entries. The earlier one had no user ID. The later one had mine. The content matched exactly. The sequence had extended to my own input. At 2:39 a.m., I stopped interacting with the system. I kept the cameras on, the logs open, and the paper in front of me. The third airport reported the same pattern as the second. Light stepping, no aircraft visible, operations entries appearing on my side first. The system queued the next departure at that airport. The path on the map extended farther northeast. I checked the clock again. It was still in sync. The 1 minute lead remained. The system was not speeding up or slowing down. It was not trying to hide the pattern. It was consistent. The absence of any response to my actions and the extension to my own notes left no part of the process outside it. At 2:41 a.m., the next departure sequence at the third airport began in the log. I wrote the time down and did not touch the controls. The entries appeared in order, each one a minute before the moment it described. The other airport confirmed their lights changed a minute after my log. There was still nothing on their cameras. I looked at the first printed page on my desk, and then at the last one. The same pattern connected them. The sequence did not start with an aircraft entering airspace. It started with a system writing an arrival, then making everything else follow. The radar only showed parts of it after the system had already committed them. When the radar stopped, the system continued without it. My shift ended at 3 a.m., and I signed out at the console I had started on. The screen refreshed and reassigned the active sequence to the next controller without asking for confirmation. His name replaced mine in the corner, but the audit trail did not change. The entries for the unknown aircraft still listed my terminal as the source. He had not touched the controls yet. The next line appeared with a time that had not happened. 1 minute later, his console registered the same action under his name. He turned toward me and asked what he had just done. I told him not to touch anything and to write down the times. The system added another entry while we were both looking at the screen. The creation time on that line was already 1 minute ahead of the clock on the wall. When the city sleeps, it notices who doesn't.